It only takes one bad interaction to lose someone's trust. So let's build experiences that learn. Let's experience smarter. Experience smarter customer service with AI that empowers people. When businesses use human insights to adapt and connect how they work, they can actually experience smarter.
Thank you for that. Can you guys hear me fine through there? Okay, awesome. Okay, good morning. It's great to be here. My name is Priya Krishnan, and as Mark said, I lead product management for data and AI, specifically around data governance, data privacy, and trustworthy MLOps and trustworthy AI, right? Before we get into the presentation, I just want to give you guys a quick, not a big bio or anything of me, but I want to set it in context. I actually started my career as a data scientist, and then I slowly moved into actually consuming and being able to produce that data. So I went from being a data scientist who felt the pains of not getting good data to do my AI projects, to the other side where now I am building products that will help actually data scientists like me use AI and scale AI, right? So just to give that perspective, if you have been a data scientist or are a data scientist, you would have felt the pinch at some point in your life, right? All right, let's get started. The 2020s have been so disruptive, right? So many labor disruptions. There are compliance standards that are hitting companies at a rapid pace. And finally, the inflation is really upturning the businesses today, right? I think we can all relate to this. Does anybody not think this at all? Right? This is kind of an obvious thing, but just wanted to set it in context that this is sort of the age of the unexpected, right? Because it is the age of the unexpected, I think companies want to use AI to navigate this unexpected, right? When we think about creating customer loyalties, automate business processes, and think about really innovating for the future, right? This is all good. I think we know this, right? And AI is fundamental to do this stuff. But is that really a reality today? Are companies able to recognize this today? Like I said, right, your AI is only as good as your data. Is your data in order? When we keep talking about scale, the very first step is to be able to get the right data so that you can think about other elements of scale before you put AI into production, which is where you really recognize the value of AI itself, right? But is your data as good as you think it is today, right? The short answer to that is really no, okay? What has really happened is this, which is, Mark, you mentioned, right? Explosive AI products throughout the enterprise. Now, because AI is in every corner of the enterprise, there is a need for data to serve that AI in every corner of the enterprise as well, okay? When we think about that, data, I love this term, data nerds, because I am one, so I can relate to this, right? Your data nerds used to be just a select few individuals who really wanted data. But if you think about today's landscape, for anybody to recognize AI at scale or any of your AI products at scale, everybody needs to have access to that data at the time that they need it immediately, right? So think about sales. They want to use data to really upsell and create opportunities before their competitors, right? If you think about marketing, for instance, they want to increase their purchasing considerations. HR wants to use data in such a volatile environment to be able to think about how to retain customers or their clients, right? IT, for instance, IT doesn't want to be the bottleneck for data. IT wants to be able to do only the projects, strategic projects that they want to focus on while giving the access to data, but decentralizing the access to data here, right? When we think about scale, this is really critical here. It all starts with access to data, right? It starts with access to good data. So if you're able to decentralize that access, think about all the technology and the innovation and the scale that comes with this access to data, right? Okay, so this is all great. This is the landscape. We know about this. We know there's disruption. We know there is AI. We need access to good data, and everybody wants self-serve access to data. But is that really easy today? We talk about it as if it's easy, and the way companies have today solved this problem is that because there are many applications that need data, the data is duplicated. Think about when the data is duplicated, right? You will need localized privacy and rules for getting access to that data, okay? And then this data is distributed across multiple geographies as well. So access to that data becomes hard, and the data is not real at all. At some point, it becomes really stale when you think about duplicating this data, and not everybody has access to the same data as well. This is a real client example. We actually had a client come to us and start with that problem. They said, we want to really put AI into production, but where we're struggling is we have data scientists sitting in Turkey, and then we have data scientists sitting in India. Now, what has happened is because they do not have a way by which they can centrally manage their data and distribute it and keep it consistent, they actually had to duplicate the data and apply local privacy rules. It got so confusing, they could not share their AI models. It was giving them the wrong information. It was drifting all the time. So you know what the solution was? They said, we just had to stop access. The data scientists could not get access to the data they wanted. They just had to run models in experiment stage, and they really could not move it into production. Okay? So really, the landscape looks like this in reality. We think that the data is just across a few clouds, but it's across multiple clouds here, right? There are not a few applications, like Mark mentioned, too many applications emerging today, and everybody needs access to that data really, really quickly. And finally, data sources. I think that one is really key. Explosive number of data sources across the hybrid landscape, and that's causing to be a problem. Again, the data is not available at the right time to the right people, but more importantly, the data is not governed, and the right people get access to the wrong data. Okay? So all your AI models still sit in experimental phases here, right? I want to tell you guys a small story before we get into sort of how we scale AI and what we think are the key elements to scale AI, right? Heinz ketchup bottle. Everybody knows about this, right? So late 1800s, what was happening was all Heinz and all their competitors, they actually wanted to meet the demands of ketchup throughout the year. But what was really happening was the tomatoes were only available in certain seasons, okay? So they had to find a way to make that ketchup and make it last throughout the year. So the way the competitors did this was there was opaque bottles, and there was a gooey mess because there were a lot of preservatives that were added, and these bottles were being stored. Naturally, the consumers did not trust what was really inside the bottle. Think about it. It's opaque, it's closed up. When you open it, it's full of preservatives. It looks kind of brown. You don't know what is inside it. So this was what was happening. Heinz at that time actually looked at this and realized that the consumers were really not trusting what was in the bottle. So naturally, the consumption went down. But the processing, making ketchup at home was really, really hard. So there was a market, there was a need, but the consumers were not really trusting what was inside. Heinz saw this opportunity, and he actually created this transparent bottle of Heinz ketchup, okay? So he was very innovative at that time. He recognized the problem, and he said, okay, I'm going to really make it transparent so a consumer can see what is really inside the bottle. First thing, I'm able to see it, okay? So I trust it instinctively. Then he put in a food label there, free from preservatives there. That was a big deal as well, right? As soon as you saw it, you were able to see that it was ketchup, and then you saw that it was free from preservatives, and then he had a tamper-proof cap, so if something went wrong, he would instinctively know immediately the customers would not buy it, and they know that that bottle has been tampered with. And finally, he also co-created the Pure Food and Drug Act, which we come to know as FDA today, because he wanted to make sure that it is in compliance with regulations, okay? All of this was done in a factory production tour. It was so successful that he actually opened up the tour of his factory, and people would actually come and look at how this is manufactured, right? Just a simple story, but just we could relate it, right? A bottle of ketchup, a consumer didn't trust it, open it up, trust, transparency, right? So if you really think about, and he was able to do this, he was able to do it at scale because there was more and more availability. He put it through the production line and he automated the entire process here. So, So if you really think about, I'm telling you this story because keep this in the background as we talk about trust as a fundamental piece to be able to scale your AI products. We talked about data. We'll talk about trust as well here, right? Okay, so when we think about how to scale AI, so we really think that it starts with data, right? It starts with trusted data. I talked about why that is important. Trusted data so that you are able to get consistently the same answer every time you request a source of data here. So the first thing is having a right data strategy with governed data, with your privacy and business controls that anybody can self-serve. That's the first piece, which is trust in data. I have the data. I've built my, okay, let's say I have great data, and then I start to build my AI models, okay? Is it transparent? Do I know what's going on, or is it a black box? Is it that gooey competitor box, or is it the transparent Heinz ketchup bottle, right? So your AI models, again, for you to be able to move it from experimental to production, which is where you really scale, it is really critical to have the right MLOps strategy with your models that can explain fairness, robustness, can detect drift, and as you go, as an AI model is built, as it moves through the AI lifecycle all the way to production, these key components have to be consistently as first principles when you build your AI models. That's the second piece, which is the trust in models, okay? So I trust my data, which is great, and then I have trusted models, which is fantastic as well. Is that it? Not exactly. We do believe there is a really key important third angle, which is the trust in process. So we talked about how there are so many compliance and regulations that are coming and hitting the industry from outside, right? So unless you are able to have a process that is able to look at this compliance and look at the entire process in the lens of a strategy that's required to automate this whole governance process and maintain and manage this, none of that strategies that you put for data and models is going to work, okay? So you've put the strategy in place for data, you've put the strategy in place for AI models, but what you need is the process that needs to be automated and consistent so that you can think about connecting to a governance framework, for instance. Everybody at any point in time knows what is the latest compliance rules that are available. You will be able to see what is going on with your AI lifecycle at any given point in time, and you're able to take action there. So that's the third aspect that we think is really important to be able to scale your AI models here. Okay? Trust in data, trust in models, and trust in process. I talked about this already, but let me go double-click and go a little bit deeper. When we talk about trust in data, I talked about how critical this is, right? So what are some aspects of trust in data that you should start thinking about, right? First one is it of good quality data? Am I able to see, if I'm doing feature engineering, am I able to make sure that I have the right features to build my AI models? And do I have the right data to be able to build a robust model, okay? The second one is self-serve. We think that this is critical, and this is really, really, really going to explode in the industry. Okay? Think about everybody who needs self-serve access to data. Again, decentralized access to data, but with centralized controls, which is the third piece, which is privacy, right? Everybody who needs access to data is able to get access to that data, but they do not have to worry about any compliance rules. That is managed centrally, and it's consistently applied to anybody who wants self-serve access to data. And the last one is collaboration. So I have this data. Let's say that I've taken data from somewhere, and I've already done something with that data, and I'm using the data to build models. How cool would it be if I'm able to share all of this with somebody else who's also having access to that data, And all of us use the consistent set of data to build the right models for AI. Okay? So those are the 4 elements that we think are key in order to design a good data strategy, which we call trust in data. Okay? The second one is trust in models. We talked a little bit about this. I think you just have to imagine the Heinz ketchup bottle and sort of relate these elements to what we talked about here, right? But before we actually get into that, the first element is building, right? We do believe that if you are in an enterprise, collaboration and sharing is very critical here, right? But the first piece of that build is, instead of relying on just a few data scientists who can write deep code, how awesome would it be if all of us could turn into actually data scientists, right? So the importance of low-code, no-code tools and collaboration is really, really critical in order to scale your models, even at the build stage. If I'm able to get halfway through, the system is able to design a model for me without me having to do much, with the right access to data, I'm already there halfway through. Think about all the time that I save, and then if I'm able to share this model with even a core data scientist who then wants to take that model and refine it, I think that will go a long way in scaling. The second one is the pipelines. So again, if you're able to automate your MLOps pipeline, this seems trivial, but think about it, right? The right data, the right models, the right people, the right collaborators in the right process. If you're able to put that automation into the pipeline continuously, that would really go a long way again in moving these models that are still in experimental phase over into production. Okay? The third one is fairness and bias. This is very, very critical. So if you think about the loan applications, we've heard so many stories. Actually, let me tell you this one. I heard this from a salesperson here, right? There is a father and a son who are coming back from a concert, and they meet with an accident, okay? And the father dies, and the son is very critical and taken to the hospital. The doctor looks at the son and says, "Oh my God, I cannot operate on him. He's my son." Okay? How many of you, what's the answer? What do you think? Mother, right? It's the mother. Mother says, "I can't operate on the son," right? But I don't know how many of you immediately thought about that. You did?
The majority of people studying medicine in the UK are female.
It's not, so you guys are smarter than I am, but immediately I had to think for a minute. So the bias, I was talking about the bias, it's there in our minds, but it's there everywhere. A loan application, for instance, has been rejected many, many times. Maybe not in the UK, that's good. But we've had studies in the US where this has happened here, right? So that is really, really critical. Explainable. Again, I want that to be a transparent Heinz bottle. Can I know why my AI model made the decision that it made, right? And finally, robustness, right? If you had a model today, it is going to drift. You know that. There's new data, there's new insights, your models are going to drift. Is my model robust enough to be able to detect this drift and be able to self-correct or retrain that model? So that, if you think about trust in models. The last one is trust in the process. We talked about this, right? If you are able to have a process in place, this could be any kind of an MRM tooling or any kind of process, governance process system in your enterprise, right? But if you're able to, as you go through the process, think about the orchestration and the facts and the lineage. Throughout the AI lifecycle, if you're able to record what happens to data and the model as it flows through the system, and you're able to get a report as it happens, and as the changes happen, it keeps recording it, it goes a long way in compliance and regulations here, right? Finally, we talk about the validation and the AI models and risks. Again, this is sort of whatever process is in place today. If there is no process in place, I think it's imperative to think about a governance process, an AI governance process in place here. Okay? Time? 2 minutes? Okay. So what does all this look like? If you just think about a landscape here, if we have to design a system or an enterprise tool, or if you have to pick a tool, or a set of tools, what does this really look like? It starts with the client priorities here. If you think about improving customer experience, for instance, right? That could translate into multiple use cases. AI for customer care and AI for automation, as an example, could be 2 of the use cases that are necessary for these client priorities. If you peel the onion back a little bit, you will look at the capabilities that make up or help us achieve these use cases are sort of these four that tie to the trust in data, trust in models, and trust in process we talked about. The MLOps and trustworthy AI, which talked about bias, fairness, automation, data governance and privacy, being able to get the right data, multi-cloud data integration. Not only do I want access to governed data, but I want to be able to get this data wherever it is in the system. It could be virtual assets, it could be data that's moving in the system, it could be data that is sitting across multiple clouds or even hybrid cloud. And finally, Customer 360, which is ability to be able to connect all this data, an ontology to be able to create a Customer 360 view. Each one of these enhanced with AI. And finally, again, the data source can be anything. It can be a traditional database, it can be the new data lake houses, and it has to work across the hybrid cloud landscape. Okay? It's sort of think about it as a architecture more than an architecture, but if you start looking for these elements, I think these will give you some components to start to put AI into production. I think I'm running out of time. I wanted to show you guys a demo, but we'll stop with this. What I wanted to say here was the best business strategy is a consistent customer. But when we think of customers, we always think of customers outside. I wanted to show you guys a demo which talked about actually a customer who's internal, which is an HR company that actually implemented AI in production at scale using our technologies, but it was more for their own employees. They thought about their employee attrition, and they were able to put AI at scale using our technologies and actually prevent customer churn. When I say customer churn, in this case, I mean employee churn here as well, right? I do not have the time to show the demo, unfortunately, but I do want to say that if you're thinking about partnering for AI at scale, you should think about these three elements, right? You own your data, right? Nobody should be able to take that away from you. Wherever your data sits, you own the data, you should be able to use that data. You should be able to run it in any environment using any vendor of choice. So it's not disruptive. You should be able to use your technology of choice and run it wherever your data is. And finally, when you think about trust, think about the industry experience that a company can bring for you here, right? All right, let's create together. Please come and visit us at the IBM station, and we can show you a little more of the demo, and we can talk about how we do AI at scale and give you some examples and help you. All right?
Perfect. Priya, do you have a minute for some questions?
I do.
Okay.
If we have the time. Yeah.
Dan has got the mic, so if you have a question, this gentleman back here is going to scramble. I have one to start, and it's interesting to me, hopefully if you can talk about this. You started talking about data, you know, all this really critical, the oil that we talk about for AI and all that. So when you think about it, the work that you have to do before to have clean data, can you talk about that for a minute and just what your perspective is and how companies should think about that?
Yeah. So I think the first thing is data sources, right? So when we work with really large clients, it's very intimidating for them to think about, I want to get good data, right? And they don't know where to start. So the first thing we tell them is start with one use case, but start with very few data sources. And think about a diverse data source, which is pick 4 data sources as an example, but let it be across multiple hybrid technologies. Like it can be on 2 clouds, it can be on-prem data, right? As soon as you have that, use a technology that is not able to move, you don't have to move any data, right? First, just get the data in order in terms of virtualized assets. So think about it that way and start to apply some principles of data quality on top of that. Once you like that, then you start to scale. Then you move the data if you want to move it to a data lake house. If you don't move it, that's fine too. But that's the first thing that we tell people to start thinking about. Start small with a use case, few data sources, but let it be across a hybrid cloud environment. And think about using virtualization as a means to start before you go on to do other things.
Good.
That's one technique as an example.
Dan, we have time for a question? Anyone? There's one right over here.
Hi, yeah, thanks. So my question is also related to data quality itself, right? So a lot of times we do get data, and as the process you said, we first try and refine the data and then make it, such that its quality is suitable for us to go ahead with the production and go ahead on developing on that. But many a times this itself, the data, the source from where it's coming, now it starts to change, it starts to bring in more problems or so. So is there any way through which we can actually make this process more robust so that we do not have to go back to the drawing board every time?
Yeah. So when I talked about the trust in data, I think one of the elements that's emerging in the industry is this concept of data fabric. I don't know if you guys have heard about it a lot more, but I'm happy to talk offline as well. But the concept of data fabric exactly does that, which is every time you are accessing that data, and as the data source changes, the system automatically reprocesses the data, applies the quality rules, applies the privacy rules. So every time the data comes through the system, you always have up-to-date data. And the beauty of that is that it's not a prescribed set of tools or technologies, and this is where you do it. Like I said, if you're using virtualized data, it can apply those rules to virtualized data. If you're moving the data into a lakehouse, it can apply the rules of that. But the idea of the fabric is exactly what you said, which is being able to get the right quality of data, but as the data changes, it automatically redoes the data for you, so you do not have to worry about it. I'm happy to talk more. I think we're running out of time. But the concept of data fabric is exactly that, which is the trust in data element.
Awesome.
All right, thanks.
Thanks, Priya. That's great.
Thank you so much.
You mentioned that you're here,
I'm here.
At the booth for a while. So
I'm
if
here.
you
I'm
want
at
to
the
go through
booth.
that.
Come and see us at the booth. Catch me anywhere. I'm in a bright red shirt. You can't miss me.
Right.
So, yeah.
So they can talk more about these processes.
Absolutely.
Okay, perfect.
Thank
you,
you.
Priya. Appreciate it. Thank you.